and to date. The Crossfire Hurricane Investigation. Within days after opening Crossfire Hurricane, the FBI opened full investigations on 4 members of the Trump campaign team: George Papadopoulos, Carter Page, Paul Manafort, and Michael Flynn. No defensive briefing was provided to Trump or anyone in the campaign concerning the information received from Australia that suggested there might be some type of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, either prior to or after these investigations were opened. Instead, the FBI began working on requests for the use of FISA authorities against Page and Papadopoulos. The effort, as related to Papadopoulos proved, page 11, unsuccessful. Similarly, the initial effort directed at Page was unsuccessful until the Crossfire Hurricane investigators first obtained what was designated as company intelligence reports generated by Christopher Steele, as set forth in Section 4D1B, II, and III. And in brief below, the Steele reports were first provided to the FBI in early July 2016, but for unexplained reasons only made their way to the Crossfire Hurricane investigators in mid-September. The reports were ostensibly assembled based on information provided to Steele and his company by a primary subsource, who the FBI eventually determined in December 2016 was Igor Danchenko. Our investigation determined that the Crossfire Hurricane investigators did not and could not corroborate any of these substantive allegations contained in the Steele reporting, nor was Steele able to produce corroboration or any of the reported allegations even after being offered $1 million or more by the FBI for such corroboration. Further, when interviewed by the FBI in January 2017, Danchenko also was unable to corroborate any of these substantive allegations in the reports. Rather, Danchenko characterized the information he provided to Steele as rumor and speculation and the product of casual conversation. In Section 4D1H, describes other efforts undertaken by the Crossfire Hurricane investigators working on the Page FISA application. Those efforts included having CHS's record conversations with Page, Papadopoulos, and a senior Trump foreign policy advisor. The FBI's own records and the recordings established that Page made multiple exculpatory statements to the individuals identified as CHS1, but the Crossfire Hurricane investigators failed to make that information known to the department attorneys or to the FISC. Page also made explicit statements refuting allegations contained in the Steele reporting about his lack of relationship with Paul Manafort, but the FBI failed to follow logical investigative leads related to those statements and to report to department lawyers what they found. Similarly, multiple recordings of Papadopoulos were made by CHS1 and a second CHS, in which Papadopoulos also made multiple exculpatory statements that were not brought to the attention of the department lawyers or the FISC. Furthermore, our investigation resulted in the prosecution and conviction of an FBI OGC attorney for intentionally falsifying a document that was material to the FISC's consideration of one of the Page FISA applications. The Steele dossier. In the spring of 2016, Perkins Coie and U.S.-based international law firm, acting as counsel to the Clinton campaign, retained Fusion GPS, a U.S.-based investigative firm, to conduct, page 12, opposition research on Trump and his associates. In May 2016, Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS met with Steele in the United Kingdom and subsequently retained Steele and his firm, Orbis Business Intelligence, or Orbis, to investigate Trump's ties to Russia. Steele described himself as a former intelligence official for the British government and was also at the time an FBI CHS. Beginning in July 2016 and continuing through December 2016, the FBI received a series of reports from Steele and Orbis that contained derogatory information about Trump concerning Trump's reported ties to Russia. As discussed in Section 4D1B2, Steele provided the first of his reports to his FBI handler on July 5th. These reports were colloquially referred to as the Steele dossier or Steele reports. As noted, it was not until mid-September that the Crossfire Hurricane investigators received several of the Steele reports. Within days of their receipt, the unvetted and unverified Steele reports were used to support probable cause in the FBI's FISA applications targeting Page, a U.S. citizen who, for a period of time, had been an advisor to Trump. As discussed later in the report, this was done at a time when the FBI knew that the same information Steele had provided to the FBI had also been fed to the media and others in Washington, D.C. In particular, one allegation contained in an undated Steele report identified as 2016/095 described a well-developed conspiracy of cooperation between Trump, his campaign, and senior Russian officials. This allegation would ultimately underpin the 4 FISA applications targeting Page. Specifically, the allegation stated, "Speaking in confidence to the compatriot on late July 2016, Source E, an ethnic Russian close associate of Republican U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump, admitted that there was a well-developed conspiracy of cooperation between them and the Russian leadership. This was managed on the Trump side by a Republican candidate campaign manager, Paul Manafort, who was using foreign policy advisor Carter Page and others as intermediaries. The two sides had a mutual interest in defeating Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, whom President Putin apparently both hated and feared." Igor Danchenko, this is page 13. Igor Danchenko, Steele's primary subsource. As noted, the FBI attempted over time to investigate and analyze the Steele reports, but ultimately was not able to confirm or corroborate any of the substantive allegations contained in those reports. In the context of these efforts, and as discussed in sections 4D1B, 9, and 10, the FBI learned that Steele relied primarily on a U.S.-based Russian national, Igor Danchenko, to collect information that ultimately formed the core allegations found in the reports. Specifically, our investigation discovered that Danchenko himself had told another person that he, Danchenko, was responsible for 80% of the intel and 50% of the analysis contained in the Steele dossier. In December 2016, the FBI identified Danchenko as Steele's primary subsource. Danchenko agreed to meet with the FBI, and under the protection of an immunity letter, he and his attorney met with the Crossfire Hurricane investigators on January 24, 25, and 26 in 2017. Thereafter, from January 2017 through October 2020, and as part of its efforts to determine the truth or falsity of specific information in the Steele reports, the FBI conducted multiple interviews of Danchenko regarding, among other things, the information he provided to Steele, as discussed in Section 4D1B9. During these interviews, Danchenko was unable to provide any corroborating evidence to support the Steele allegations, and further described his interactions with his subsources as rumor and speculation, and conversations of a casual nature. Significant parts of what Danchenko told the FBI were inconsistent with what Steele told the FBI during his prior interviews in October 2016 and September 2017. At no time, however, was the FISC informed of these inconsistencies. Moreover, notwithstanding the repeated assertions that the Page FISA applications that Steele's primary subsource was based in Russia, Danchenko for many years had lived in Washington, D.C. area. After learning that Danchenko continued to live in the Washington area and had not left except for domestic and foreign travel, the FBI never corrected this assertion in the 3 subsequent Page FISA renewal applications. Rather, beginning in March 2017, the FBI engaged Danchenko as a CHS and began making regular financial payments to him for information, none of which corroborated Steele's reporting. I'll read a few references at the bottom of this page. Our investigators uncovered little evidence suggesting that prior to the submission of the first Page FISA application, the FBI had made any serious attempts to identify Steele's primary subsource other than asking Steele to disclose the identities of his sources, which he refused to do. The reliability of Steele's reporting depended heavily on the reliability of his primary subsource because, as represented to the FISC, Steele's source reporting was principally derived from the primary subsource, who purportedly was running a network of subsources. In Carter, the failure to identify the primary subsource early in the investigations pursuant of FISA authority prevented the FBI from properly examining the possibility that some or much of the non-open source information contained in Steele's reporting was Russian disinformation that wittingly or unwittingly was passed along to Steele, or that the reporting was otherwise not credible. Page 14. The unresolved prior FBI counterintelligence investigation of Danchenko. Importantly, and as discussed in Section 4D1C, the FBI knew in January 2017 that Danchenko had been the subject of an FBI counterintelligence investigation from 2009 to 2011. In late 2008, while Danchenko was employed by the Brookings Institute, he engaged two fellow employees about whether one of the employees might be willing or able in the future to provide classified information in exchange for money. According to one employee, Danchenko believed that he, the employee, might be following a mentor into the incoming Obama administration and have access to classified information. During this exchange, Danchenko informed the employee that he had access to people who were willing to pay for classified information. The concerned employee passed this information to the U.S. government contact, and the information was subsequently passed to the FBI. Based on this information, in 2009, the FBI opened a preliminary investigation into Danchenko. The FBI converted its investigation into a full investigation after learning that Danchenko had been identified as an associate of two FBI counterintelligence subjects and had previous contact with the Russian embassy and known Russian intelligence officers. Also, as discussed in Section 4D1C, at that earlier time, agents had interviewed several former colleagues of Danchenko who raised concerns about Danchenko's potential involvement with Russian intelligence. For example, one such colleague who had interned at a U.S. intelligence agency informed the office that Danchenko frequently inquired about that person's knowledge of a specific Russian military matter. Meanwhile, in July 2010, the FBI initiated a request to use FISA authorities against Danchenko, which was subsequently routed to department attorneys in January 2010. However, the investigation into Danchenko was closed in March 2011 after the FBI incorrectly concluded that Danchenko had left the country and returned to Russia. Our review found that no indication that the Crossfire Hurricane investigators ever attempted to resolve the prior Danchenko espionage matter before opening him as a paid CHS. CHS is Confidential Human Source. I'm not sure they said that earlier, that I read that earlier. Confidential Human Source, CHS. Moreover, our investigation found no indication that the Crossfire Hurricane investigators disclosed the existence of Danchenko's unresolved counterintelligence investigation to the department attorneys who were responsible for drafting the FISA renewal applications targeting Carter Page. As a result, the FISC was never advised of the information that very well may have affected the FISC's view of Steele's primary subsource and Steele's reliability and trustworthiness. Equally important is the fact that in not resolving Danchenko's status vis-a-vis the Russian intelligence services, it appears the FBI never gave appropriate consideration to the possibility that the intelligence Danchenko was providing to Steele, which again, according to Danchenko himself, made up a significant majority of the information in the Steele dossier reports, was in whole or in part Russian disinformation. Danchenko's relationship with Charles Dolan. During the relevant time period, Danchenko maintained a relationship with Charles Dolan, a Virginia-based public relations professional who had previously held multiple positions and roles in the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic Party. In his role as a public relations professional, Dolan focused much of his career interacting with Eurasian clients, with a particular focus on Russia. As described in Section 4D1D2, Dolan previously conducted business with the Russian Federation and maintained relationships with several key Russian government officials, including Dmitry Peskov, the powerful press secretary of the Russian presidential administration. A number of these Russian government officials with, page 15, whom Dolan maintained a relationship and was in contact with at the time, Danchenko was collecting information for Steele would later appear in the dossier. In the summer and fall of 2016, at the time Danchenko was collecting information for Steele, Dolan traveled to Moscow, as did Danchenko, in connection with a business conference. As discussed in Section 4D1D3, the business conference was held at the Ritz-Carlton, Moscow, which, according to the Steele reports, was allegedly the site of the salacious sexual conduct on the part of Trump. Danchenko would later inform the FBI that he learned of these allegations through Ritz-Carlton staff members. Our investigation, however, revealed that it was Dolan, not Danchenko, who actually interacted with the hotel staff identified in the Steele reports. So between the two, Dolan appears the more likely source of the allegations. As discussed in Section 4D1D6, our investigation also uncovered that Dolan was the definitive source for at least one allegation in the Steele reports. This allegation, contained in Steele Report 2016/105, concerned the circumstances surrounding the designation of Paul Manafort from the Trump campaign. When interviewed by the office, Dolan admitted that he fabricated the allegation about Manafort that appeared in the Steele report. Our investigation also revealed that in some instances, Dolan independently received other information strikingly similar to the allegations that would later appear in the Steele reports. Nevertheless, when interviewed by the FBI, Danchenko denied that Dolan was a source for any information in the Steele reports. Furthermore, as discussed in Section 4D1D3, during the relevant time period, Dolan maintained a business relationship with Olga Galkina, a childhood friend of Danchenko, who, according to Danchenko, was a key source for many of the allegations contained in the Steele reports. In fact, Galkina was interviewed by the FBI in August 2017. She admitted to providing Dolan with information that would later appear in the Steele reports. The FBI's failure to interview Charles Dolan. Our investigation revealed that the Crossfire Hurricane investigators were aware of Dolan and his connections to Danchenko and the Steele reports. In fact, as discussed in Section 4D1BV, or 5, in early October 2016, Steele informed the FBI that Dolan was a person who might have relevant information about Trump. The FBI interviewed hundreds of individuals through the course of Crossfire Hurricane and later investigations, and yet it did not interview Dolan about a possible source of information about Trump. Our investigators interviewed Dolan on several occasions, as well as the two other persons mentioned by Steele. Dolan initially denied being a source of information for the Steele reports. When, however, he was shown a particular Steele report relating to Paul Manafort and his resignation as Trump's campaign manager, along with related emails between himself and Danchenko in August 2016, he acknowledged that the reporting mirrored the information he had provided to Danchenko. Dolan acknowledged to the office that he fabricated this information. Although both Steele and Olga Galkina suggested to the FBI that Dolan may have had information related to the Steele reports, our investigation was not able to definitively show that Dolan was the actual source, whether wittingly or unwittingly, for any additional allegations set forth in the Steele reports. Regardless, in light of the foregoing, there does not appear to have been an objectively sound reason for the FBI's failure to interview Dolan. Page 16. Danchenko's claims regarding Sergei Milyan. Perhaps the most damning allegation in the Steele dossier's reports was Company Report 2016/95, which Steele attributed to Source E, one of Danchenko's supposed subsources. This report, portions of which were included in each of the 4-page FISA applications, contributed to the public narrative of Trump's conspiring and colluding with Russian officials. As discussed in Section 4D1F, Danchenko's alleged source for information, Source E, was an individual by the name of Sergei Milyan, who was the president of the Russian-American Chamber of Commerce in New York City and a public Trump supporter. The evidence uncovered by the office showed that Danchenko never spoke with Sergei Milyan and simply fabricated the allegations that he attributed to Milyan. When interviewed by Crossfire Hurricane investigators in late January 2017, Danchenko said that Source E in Report 2016/95 sounded as though it was Sergei Milyan. As discussed in Section 4D1FI, Danchenko stated that he never actually met Milyan. Instead, he said that in late July 2016, he received an anonymous call from a person who did not identify himself, but who spoke with a Russian accent. Danchenko further explained that he thought it might have been Milyan, someone Danchenko previously had emailed twice and received no response, after watching a YouTube video of Milyan speaking. Thus, a detailed Thus, as detailed in Section 4D1FI, the total support for the Source E information contained in Steele Report 2016/95 is a purported anonymous call from someone Danchenko had never met or spoken to, but who he believed might be Sergey Millian, a Trump supporter, based on his listening to a YouTube video of Millian. Unfortunately, the investigation revealed that instead of taking even basic steps, such as securing telephone call records for either Danchenko or Millian to investigate Danchenko's hard-to-believe story about Millian, the Crossfire Hurricane investigators appeared to have chosen to ignore this and other red flags concerning Danchenko's credibility, as well as Steele's. The Alpha Bank allegations. The office also investigated the actions of Perkins Coie attorney Michael Sussman and others in connection with Sussman's provision of data and white papers to FBI General Counsel James Baker, purporting to show that there existed a covert communications channel between the Trump organization and a Russia-based bank called Alpha Bank, as set forth in Section 4E1C III. In doing so, he presented to Baker by text message and in person that he was acting on his own and was not representing any client or company in providing the information to the FBI. Our investigation showed that, in point of fact, these representations to Baker were false and that Sussman was representing the Clinton campaign, as evidenced by, among other things, his law firm's billing records and internal communications. In addition, Sussman was representing a second client, a technology executive named Rodney Joffe, Joffe, as evidenced by various written communications, Sussman's subsequent congressional testimony, and other records. Page 17. A note on page 16. A federal grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia returned a 5-count indictment against Danchenko, charging him with making false statements. A trial jury, however, found that the evidence was not sufficient to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Now we're on page 17. Cyber experts from the FBI examined the materials given to Baker and concluded that they did not establish what Sussman claimed they showed. At a later time, Sussman made a separate presentation regarding the Alpha Bank allegations to another U.S. government agency, and it too concluded that the materials did not show what Sussman claimed. In connection with that second presentation, Sussman made a similar false statement to that agency, claiming that he was not providing the information on behalf of any client. With respect to the Alpha Bank materials, our investigation established that Joffe had tasked a number of computer technology researchers who worked for companies he was affiliated with and who had access to certain internet records to mine the internet data to establish an inference and narrative tying then-candidate Trump to Russia. In directing these research to exploit their access in this manner, Joffe indicated that he was seeking to please certain VIPs in context referring to individuals at Perkins Coie who are involved in campaign matters and Clinton campaign. During his investigation, the office also learned that after the 2016 presidential election, Joffe emailed an individual and told that person that he, Joffe, was tentatively offered the top cybersecurity job by the Democrats when it looked like they'd win. Apologize for mispronouncing his name if I am. No disrespect. As explained in Section 4E1CI, the evidence collected by the office also demonstrated that prior to providing the unfounded Alpha Bank claims to the FBI, Sussman and Fusion GPS, the Clinton campaign's opposition research firm, had provided the same information to various news organizations and were pressing reporters to write articles about the alleged secret communications channel. Moreover, during the September 26th meeting at the FBI, Sussman told Baker that an unnamed news outlet was in possession of the information and would soon publish a story about it. The disclosure of the media's involvement caused the FBI to contact the news outlet, whose name was eventually provided by Sussman in the hopes of delaying any public reporting on the subject. In doing so, it confirmed for the New York Times that the FBI was looking into the matter. On October 31, 2016, less than 2 weeks before the election, the New York Times and others published articles on the Alpha Bank matter, and the Clinton campaign issued tweets and public statements on the allegations of a secret channel of communications being used by the Trump organization and a Russian bank, allegations that had been provided to the media and the FBI by Fusion GPS and Sussman, both of whom were working for the Clinton campaign. Conclusion. Based on the review of Crossfire Hurricane and related intelligence activities, we conclude that the Department and the FBI failed to uphold their important mission of strict fidelity to the law in connection with certain events and activities described in this report. As noted, former FBI attorney Kevin Kleinsmith committed a criminal offense by fabricating language in an email that was material to the FBI obtaining a FISA surveillance order. In other instances, FBI personnel working on the same FISA application displayed, at best, a cavalier attitude towards accuracy and completeness. The FBI personnel also repeatedly disregarded important requirements when they continued to seek renewal of that FISA surveillance, while acknowledging, both then and in hindsight, that they did not genuinely believe there was probable cause to believe that the target was knowingly engaged in a clandestine intelligence, page 18, activities on behalf of foreign power, or knowingly helping another person in such activities. And certain personnel disregarded significant exculpatory information that should have prompted investigative restraint and reexamination. Our investigation also revealed that senior FBI personnel displayed a serious lack of analytical rigor toward the information that they received, especially information received from politically affiliated persons and entities. This information, in part, triggered the sustained Crossfire Hurricane and contributed to the subsequent need for Special Counsel Mueller's investigation. In particular, there was significant reliance on investigative leads provided funded directly or indirectly by Trump's political opponents. The department did not adequately examine or question these materials and the motives of those providing them, even when at about the same time the director of the FBI and others learned of significant and potentially contrary intelligence. In light of the foregoing, there is a continuing need for the FBI and the department to recognize that lack of analytical rigor, apparent confirmation bias, and an overwillingness to rely on information from individuals connected to political opponents cause investigators to fail to adequately consider alternative hypotheses and to act without appropriate objectivity or restraint in pursuing allegations of collusion or conspiracy between a U.S. political campaign and a foreign power. Although recognizing that in hindsight much is clear, much of this also seems to have been clear at the time. We therefore believe it is important to examine past conduct to identify shortcomings and improve how the government carries out its most sensitive functions. Section 5 discusses some of these issues more fully. This report does not recommend any wholesale changes in the guidelines and policies that the Department and FBI now have in place to ensure proper conduct and accountability and how counterintelligence activities are carried out. Rather, is it intended to accurately describe the matters that fell under our review and to assist the Attorney General in determining how the Department and the FBI can do better, more credible job in fulfilling its responsibilities and in analyzing and responding to political charged allegations in the future. Ultimately, of course, meeting those responsibilities comes down to the integrity of the people who take an oath to follow the guidelines and policies currently in place, guidelines that date from the time of Attorney General Levi and that are designed to ensure the rule of law upheld. As such, the answer is not the creation of new rules, but a renewed fidelity to the old. The promulgation of additional rules and regulations to be learned, and yet more training sessions would likely prove to be a fruitless exercise if the FBI's guiding principles of fidelity, bravery, and integrity are not, page 19, ingrained in the hearts and minds of those sworn to meet the FBI's mission of protecting the American people and upholding the Constitution of the United States.